Hello, I'm Plutoburns, and welcome to Eagleland. Sakurasaku Shoukougun is one of those titles that I cannot simplify. The best English translation that I can find is Exam Success Syndrome, which is its own brand of tongue twister. Neither title has a particularly standout word that I could use as a shorthand, except for Sakura, but I am not saying that Minger's name for the whole review. So, henceforth, I shall be referring to this manga as Solomon Grundy.
So why am I reviewing Solomon Grundy? By all accounts, it isn't interesting enough to warrant a review. It's a fairly standard high school romance that hasn't been around for very long and only has 4 available chapters. Well, because it's an interesting example of cliches. Manga has its own batch of cliches and story tropes that as a manga reader you eventually start to recognize. Solomon Grundy has a good collection of these tropes, some used well, others not. So let's get started by looking at the closest thing to a cover this has at the moment. We see our 2 high school students walking down the road. This is a pretty nice cover with a good energy to it. Wait, am I reading that right? Does that caption say middle school?
Show me that picture from later in the manga. Yeah, that's the one. I call shenanigans on her design. You aren't that busty at 14, especially not in Japan. I'm gonna dub this Sailor Moon syndrome, okay? Why would you even want to set your story in middle school?
Maybe it's just me, but middle school was a big nada period of my life. Hell, high school barely mattered in the grand scheme of things. I don't care if it's the age range of your target demographic. That doesn't make it a good setting for a story.
Alright, it's time to move on.
The opening pages are spent characterizing our male lead, who I shall dub Killjoy. For a 14-year-old, he is way too worried about becoming a doctor. Even his teachers are concerned by how little he talks to his classmates. Then he makes me feel like a dick by agreeing with me that middle school essentially doesn't matter to his life. Well, that's Killjoy. Now we have to introduce the love interest. And what better way to do that than with the ominous image of her covered in blood? Yeah, that's a nice way to ingratiate herself to the readers.
Actually, the manga seems to keep trying to characterize her as some gang member delinquent, which is flat out wrong. She isn't a gang member or a bad person, and trying to characterize her as such really clashes with her bubbly, airheaded personality.
Case in point, Zoe Deschanel forces her way into Killjoy's house to hide from the cops. She then asks for help studying with all the social graces of a warthog. That's right, she is the manic pixie dream girl who busts into boring introvert's life in order to spice it up. Zoe says she has fallen in love and needs to up her grades so she can go to the same high school as her boy crush. She proceeds to be socially blind and mildly obnoxious. Killjoy naturally turns her down and goes to a restaurant to study. He gets waylaid by some acquaintances who none too subtly beg him for cash. When they take his wallet, he does the smart thing and calls the police.
This is really unusual. Characters never call the police in mangas, even when someone gets kidnapped. And here's Killjoy calling the police just because he's getting hassled.
But then Zoe shows up and picks a fight to defend his honor. Killjoy takes a stray punch during the melee and passes out. He wakes up with Pixie taking care of him, and they talk about why they haven't met in so long. Here the manga does something right. The childhood friend backstory is rampant in manga, but this manga adds some extra elements. First, the 2 characters play off each other well, with Zoe being impulsive and Killjoy being staid and calm. A good combination. Also, they haven't seen each other in a while because they went to different schools and lost contact with each other. Which totally happens. This is how you properly use cliché. Add other elements to a well-established framework.
Alright, Solomon, I see your childhood friends, and I'll raise you a good chemistry and a legitimate backstory.
So Killjoy agrees to help her study, but shock of all shocks, turns out Zoe is a bit of a moron, and he has got his work cut out for him. Solomon Grundy's second chapter is much less interesting than the first and only has 3 interesting bits. 1, we get introduced to the secondary romance option.
Oh, come on, you know this character. The one who's in love with the main character, but has no chance with them, since obviously the main protagonists are gonna hook up. You see this character in everything.
Second, we are introduced to the incredibly short Student Council President. She has a personal vendetta against Zoe, designating her as our token villain for the coming chapters.
Oh, sure, everyone in middle school had their own personal nemesis. Didn't you?
And finally, Killjoy persuades Zoe to start attending school again, since that will improve her grades even more. This goes as poorly as you might expect, but the events really come to a head when Zoe decides to destroy school property and assault someone for laughing at Killjoy's plan of becoming a doctor. Teachers show up, and Killjoy decides to give up on tutoring Zoe since she broke her promise not to fight in school. Later, we find her sitting on his roof in the rain. She hops down and proclaims that she was in the right and did nothing wrong.
Regardless of the fact that they were insulting your friend, kicking a sliding door into someone's face was not the correct reaction. I will not be convinced that you were in the right, even though you are the main character.
So we have some back and forth. Zoe reveals she has problems with people not trusting her.
'Cause she has totally demonstrated that she is trustworthy, having gotten into 3 fights in 2 chapters.
But then she reveals she did a crap ton of practice problems, proving she is at least serious about studying. So she gets toweled off, symbolizing her having risen above the low point of being drenched in water while on the roof.
What? Alright. Rain as someone's low point followed by the cleansing of overcoming is a very common symbolic shorthand used in all forms of visual medium, not just manga. And its use here was totally legitimate. The only reason I even noticed enough to be snarky was because I was in full critique mode while reading this piece. I apologize, Solomon Grundy, my snark was uncalled for.
How's my time? Ugh, better pick up the pace. So, Chapter 3 features Mini-Me graffitiing on the wall and blaming Zoe. Zoe has to clean it up. There is some spectacularly bad parenting and teaching going on in this chapter, but I don't have time to rant on that now. For reasons I cannot fathom, Mini-Me returns to the school at night to check on her prank. Finding the wall properly cleaned, she prepares to reapply some vandalism, but then Killjoy appears. He claims that he was waiting there since most criminals return to the scene of the crime.
Yeah, no, I call BS. He is not here because of how smart he is here for writing convenience. Don't try to pull the wool over my eyes, Solomon.
Well, Muttley is properly cowed by Killjoy, banishing her from the token villain role for the foreseeable future. So we move on to the current final chapter of Solomon Grundy. This one is actually kind of good. It introduces Zoe's crush as an actual character. I forgot to mention that we know who Zoe's crush is. He is some boy whom she met at the dojo who was featured in a magazine about boxing. Well, now we actually get to meet Pretty Boy when he rescues Killjoy from a nasty fall down some stone steps. What a coinky-dink. So Zoe goes all fangirl on Mega Man for a bit. When he asks whether Zoe and Killjoy are dating, she very bluntly says that they are not and that she has no interest in dating Killjoy. Killjoy is understandably staggered by these words. Before he limps his way home, he turns to Zoe and tells her that he will cheer for her in her pursuit of Mega Man.
This is where the manga made me stop and think. Though I, as an experienced manga reader, knew from the get-go that our 2 main protagonists would be romantically paired, that doesn't mean that the plotline had to agree with me. Even this far into the story, Killjoy still has not realized the depths of his feelings for Zoe, and he is now coming to the painful realization that he loves a girl who does not love him back.
He returns to his room and realizes that the only source of joy and light in his life currently is Zoe. He breaks down and cries as it finally hits him that he still loves Zoe just as much as he did when he was a small boy.
And so ends the current final chapter of Solomon Grundy. What did I think of it? It has potential.
As I said before, there is good and bad use of cliches present in this manga. But the all-important main characters have a good chemistry and a believable backstory, and the fourth chapter manages to dredge up some actual pathos for Killjoy. And one thing I didn't have time to cover was how much of a stick-in-the-mud Killjoy is. The manga is very good at establishing how overly concerned he is with his future, without beating us over the head with it. But on the downside, the backup characters are cardboard plot devices, and the manga doesn't do enough to distinguish itself from the cliches of its genre.
So I guess my recommendation is only if you're a fan of high school romance and you're looking for something new and decent. Solomon Grundy is written and drawn by Hoshi Renji. Hoshi Renji, to the best of my research, has only one other work which has not been translated into English at this time. It is an ecchi harem piece entitled Omusobi Chometsu. Omusobi meaning rice ball, and Chometsu resisting all of my attempts to translate it. I wasn't able to find much about it, but what I did find did not allay my fears that Chapter 4 was a fluke, and that Solomon Grundy is not going to get better later on. It's kind of a weak place to end this episode. What else can I do?
Solomon Grundy want pants too!
That'll do. I'm Plutoburns, and this has been Eagleland.
Do you feel it all the time?